So just a couple ground rules as we get started with tonight's session. So tonight's session, EmpowerU is providing a forum for discussion and debate of public issues. And in light of the lawsuit that's been filed and discussed in the news, we want to know more information about it. We're not supporting or ratifying the statements of anybody here, but simply seeking more information. Now, I'm going to warn you, it's going to get a little bit in the weeds with some financial stuff. And if you start to feel a little bit like you're losing track of us, go down to the bottom of your screen and there's a Q&A, and just throw us out a question and we'll try to get it answered. And the speakers are going to get into Q&As, I don't know, closer to 7:45 or 7:50 after we've talked about a few things. But start throwing up your questions. We are going to take as many questions as we can tonight. Before our speakers come on, which is going to be in just a second, there's just a couple things I want to make sure everybody understands about what we're going to talk about. Let's talk about the State Central Committee first. The State Central Committee is 66 members. There is one man and one woman voted on in each Ohio Senate district. So there's 33 Senate districts times 2 is equal to 66 State Central Committee members. So for instance, I'm in Senate District 8 in Hamilton County. We've got 2 members in Senate District 8. Alex Trantafilo is one State Central member. Marianne Christie is the other State Central Committee member. And I'm pretty sure this is accurate, but Mark or Laura can correct me if I'm wrong. All State Central Committee members are voted on in the May primary this year. A few other foundational facts. Bob Paduchik is chairman of the Ohio Republican Party. He reports to the entire 66-person Central Committee. There is not an executive committee that he reports to. Paduchik does not report to Mike DeWine, although in talking to people, most people seem to think that he does. That's the innuendo I hear. That's my take on it. Once the chairman is elected, they control virtually everything about the party. That's one of the things I want to bring to light today. It's a lot of power for one person. The Ohio Republican Party bylaws, you'll hear us talk about them tonight. They're published on EmpowerUAmerica.org under tonight's class. You can just pull them up and you can look at the rules. There are questions on both sides or disagreements on both sides about things that are in the bylaws and things that aren't in the bylaws. Jane Timken, her name will be referred to in this class. She is the former chairperson of the Ohio Republican Party. She was the chairperson before Bob Paduchik. Chairman Paduchik was invited to speak at tonight's class. I invited him to speak through his attorney, Mark Weaver, but Mr. Weaver did not respond back. A couple final things. There was an important meeting on December 3rd. It's really one of the reasons I put this session together. Where I watched it, it troubled me. There were 3 resolutions that were presented at the meeting. The first resolution I'm going to call the Bainbridge resolution, where it was called for financial statements to be audited. The second resolution was called the Rosenberger resolution. It required the chairman to follow permanent rules of the audit committee. And finally, there was the Lenahan resolution, which directed handling of cash contributions, and it required candidates that weren't properly endorsed to return the monies that they had received. In all 3 cases, I believe I've got this right, roll call votes were asked for each of the resolutions. In each case, a member of the State Central Committee voted the resolution to be referred to a committee for study, basically killing all 3 resolutions. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest tonight. Mark Bainbridge is a certified public accountant and a chartered global management accountant for 30 years of experience driving financial growth and strategic development. He really possesses an in-depth understanding of board governance, which is important for this topic, corporate compliance, and ethics. He's a retired Ernst Young partner, one of the big 4 accounting firms where he worked from 1973 to 2009. He's been a board member at several companies. He's been recognized throughout his career. He was elected on the Ohio Republican State Central Committee, representing Senate District 16 in Western Franklin and Union County. Secondly, we've got Laura Rosenberger with us, who is elected to represent Clark, Greene, and Madison counties. It's really kind of a hotbed of conservative political activity. She's been politically active in her district, launching her first major statewide crusade against Obamacare with Ohio's Healthcare Freedom Amendment. She's a homeschool veteran for 25 years who not only teaches her two children, but also classes of students in American government and literature. Her latest efforts include spearheading Ohio Bill 387, the Election Integrity Bill, which calls for stronger citizenship ID and ballot harvesting controls. In 2022, Laura was elected as the board director of the Clark County Board of Elections. When not dressed up to attend a board meeting, she rents a small organic farm with her husband, her children, and her favorite AR-15. So glad today to welcome Mark Bainbridge and Laura Rosenberger. Welcome to Empower You. We're glad to have you here. And Mark, would you go ahead and unmute your mic? Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you. We are very honored to be here.
So I thought, yeah, welcome to you both. I thought I would just kind of drill into some topics, kind of just to get people up to speed on a few things. And we'd start off, Mark, by just talking about discussing the $3 million in missing funds and just your take on it. Go, fire away. I'm gonna let you go.
Well, the key thing is this missing funds, they're missing without explanation. And we have been trying to get an explanation for over a year for what these funds are and have been unable. We've been stonewalled. You know, there is definitely a cover-up going on in the Ohio Republican Party related to these funds. And the funds are in different categories, but probably the most significant ones relate to changes in equity. And I know we don't want to get into the weeds on accounting here tonight, as you said, but one basic point of accounting is that the equity section of the balance sheet really represents the net worth of the organization. And the only changes that you can make to that are changes in the bottom line of the organization. So one simple accounting rule is that beginning equity of the period plus or minus the bottom line is the ending equity for that period. And what we have instead is, and you can look, we only have balance sheets for certain years, but we have balance sheets for 17 and 19. So if you look at the balance sheet, the liability side in as of December 31st, 2017, you will see a reduction of $1.7 million in equity. Now, right below that is an increase in equity of $970,000. And we're still back on the other one. And that 997,000 is the only number you would expect there. But somehow the equity changed. In addition to that increase in the bottom line, there was a decrease of $1.7 million. We don't know what it is. And then if you move down the page to 2019, which is another year we happen to have the equity section for, you'll see there's same thing. Only this year, it's that in 2019, it's $436,000 reduction in equity. And those numbers aren't explained. And we've been trying to get an answer for what those are. And, you know, Paduchik has totally blocked us, and including kicking us off the audit and kicking Laura off the audit committee and me off the fiscal review committee. So those are the kind of numbers we're talking about. There was also a write-off in 2021 there was a receivable on the books for about 4 years for $640,000. And when I asked the question what it was, the guy that kept the books looked at me and said, you know, I don't know. Nobody's ever asked me that question. A few months later, and I asked him to get back to me. He never got back to me. A few months later, we go to the fiscal review committee and they have written off the $643,000. So, I mean, it's just confusing things like that. And then the related cover-up is what's really frustrating. And, you know, part of this—
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
So, and yeah, I want to make sure everybody understands that we're not saying these monies have been taken or stolen, or we just don't. Nobody knows. But to put this kind of in a small business perspective, which is kind of where I'm from, Mark. So I've got a balance sheet in my company. Let's pretend that this balance sheet was mine. It shows that this particular company is worth $2.825 million. That's theoretically what it's worth. And they've made an adjustment of almost 70 or 80%, $1.71 million in 1 year. Am I looking at that correctly?
Well, actually, if you look at this, the total equity on there is $1,936,000. It's not the bottom line, it's the equity. That's the net worth of the organ. That's the assets less the liabilities. And that number, that 1,000,007, is almost as large as the total equity of the organization.
It's a huge,
So
it's a huge change.
it's a huge number. And
I mean,
there's no explanation,
so
unfortunately.
I've got to ask you a question about that, Mark. So when the State Central Committee meets, how often do they meet?
Quarterly.
So every quarter, does somebody get up and hand you financial statements and say, we're going to go through the financial statements for 10 minutes and show you how the organization's doing? Do they do that, or is that just not happen?
No, they do that. They get up and go through the financial statements. Unfortunately, the treasurer of the Ohio Republican Party, since Jane Timken asked him to be treasurer in 2017, is a man named Dave Johnson, who's from Columbiana County up in Northeast Ohio. And Dave is, let's just say, and he's written some letters talking about all this and making accusations about me, calling me a two-bit con artist, for example, in his letter to the State Central Committee and to Republican leaders across the state. And, he just doesn't understand financial statements. He doesn't know how they work. I mean, this is a guy who was the treasurer and under Ohio law maintains the books of the Ohio Republican Party, and didn't realize that for 4 years under his watch, there was a $640,000 receivable in the books, and they had no clue what it was. I mean, that's kind of unbelievable, right?
So my people who work with me at my company, that they call me a micromanager. So when a receivable is on our income on our balance sheet at work, and if it's like $1,000 and they want to write it off, I mean, to me that's a big deal. I mean, somebody's got to tell me, why are we writing off $1,000? So you're telling me there was a $640,000 receivable that was written off?
That's exactly right. In March of 2021. And the interesting thing is, I had asked the question about that in March of 2021. And then in early May, before our May meeting, the Fiscal Review Committee that I was on, or am on, was given the financial statements. And so at that point, they had not answered my question of what was the $640,000, but they wrote it off. And at that Fiscal Review Committee, they just tried to bury the fact that they had written this off and not even explain it. And so I let them talk and go through the financials, etc. And at that meeting, I then asked the question, well, what happened to the $640,000 that I asked about in March? And I was just really attacked for asking detailed questions about what's in the financial statements. I mean, if you can believe that. And then at the meetings themselves, Dave spends about 10 minutes at the quarterly meetings going through the financials, but they're not comparative statements. They're not done in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So they're very meaningless financial statements, to tell you the truth. And virtually nobody understands them.
So I probably should put that document back on the screen again, because I've got a letter from the treasurer who's written us, and let me just get this back up here. So this letter, this person's name is David Whipple Johnson, who's the treasurer of the Ohio Republican Party. And this is what he says, if I've got the right letter. He says that you have filed an intentionally frivolous lawsuit. Now, Laura's going to talk about the lawsuit in a few minutes. Now, I'm looking at a reduction of retained earnings, almost the entire size of your equity. How could somebody say that that's frivolous?
Well, I can't answer that question. He's just totally ill-informed, not competent. And this is a guy, and this is kind of unbelievable. He was appointed by the governor, Governor Kasich, and then reappointed by Governor DeWine to the board of the Workers' Compensation Board of Ohio. For that, he gets $60,000 a year for being on that board at the public expense. He spends 24 hours. It's right on the state payroll. Anybody can look this up. You have to, when you report to get paid by the state, you have to report your hours. He spent 24 hours last year going to meetings for the Bureau of Workers' Comp board meetings, and he was paid $2,500 an hour, or $60,000 a year. So that's the kind of incestuous things that are going on in this committee that, so many of the committee members are beholden to the governor and others. So, they're an inside group and they don't really care about what the facts are. They just really want to maintain their position and their goodies for being on the state central committee.
Now, what I do want to let everybody know is that Mark Weaver, the attorney for Mr. Paduchik, sent us a draft of a statement, Mark, and I don't need you to respond to this unless you want to, where they talked about the $640,000 receivable and what happened to that. So there is an explanation for that, but I haven't seen an explanation for the other two amounts, we just showed you on the screen. And Mark, I know that this has been going on with you for a while, where you've been trying to get information, but I want to give people kind of a background on how this whole thing evolved with Jane Timken's involvement when this report called the Right Side Compliance Report came out. Could you explain to everybody what actually happened with that?
Well, when I got on the board in June of 2020, I asked for two things when I get on a board. I asked for the permanent rules or bylaws, and I always asked for the audit. And they sent me the permanent rules bylaws, which you said you have posted, and they're pathetic because I've seen, many hundreds of bylaws for organizations that, I audited over the years. And these are probably the weakest I've ever seen. There's no checks and balances. It gives all the power to the chairman once elected. So then I asked for the audit and was told initially that there wasn't one. And then I was told that there was one in 2017. So once they told me there was one, I just absolutely insisted to see it. And they told me the board had voted, not to let anybody see it and to keep it in a filing cabinet and locked. And I said, well, I don't care what the board voted on. I'm on the board and I want to see it. So we reached a compromise where I went down to the Ohio Republican Party and looked at it. And it's actually not an audit report. It's a report by a compliance company. It's called Right Side Compliance. It's a consulting firm. And it's a devastating report. It's one of the most devastating reports I've ever seen. And it really talks about the fact that, they're not following generally accepted accounting principles, that there's no internal controls, that there's no written accounting procedures. And they made some, very weak attempt to do that, but nothing formal would be acceptable to any kind of accountant. And they told them to hire competent people to keep the books and records. And Jane Timken wrote a 1.5-page document saying that they had complied with everything in the report. And after they got that report in 2017, the audit committee did not meet for 4 years. And when I after I read the report and called the chairman of the audit committee and asked him why they hadn't met in 4 years, his response to me was, "We trust management." And that was the response. So that's some background on this report. It's now a public document because Dwayne Pullman somehow, probably through some employee of the Ohio Republican Party, leaked it to him. He got a copy of it, and now anybody can read the report.
That report is not up on the website. I promise you, I'll get that. I'll try to get that up by tomorrow. So thanks, Mark. I want to bring Laura in to just talk about a couple things too, and let her talk to everybody about her involvement with this. Laura, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Dan.
Great to have you here.
And I'd like to thank Dawn for that wonderful rendition of the Star Spangled Banner. It's so appropriate because I kind of feel like I'm sitting out in Baltimore Harbor in 1814 watching a big battle going on.
Well, tell us about, now, when did you get elected, Laura?
2020. Like you said at the beginning of the show, we are elected in the spring primary. So that was supposed to be on St. Patrick's Day in 2020, March 17th. Unlike this year, 2 years later, it'll be in May. And the State Central Committee is elected every 2 years at that primary, and it's a one-time election. We do not go on to the general.
Now tell us about kind of your evolution, what committee you got on and when you started to get concerned and what happened.
Well, I was put on the audit committee in September by Chairman Timken. And I immediately read the bylaws, which say that the audit committee shall examine the account, the treasurer, and make an annual report. So I just guessed that, hey, our next meeting is in December, and we're going to have to make an annual report to this committee based upon an examination of the treasurer's books. And I contacted the chairman of the audit committee, Kurt Braden, a gentleman who lives up in Stark County, and requested some meetings, and he basically blew me off for, I think, 2 or 3 meetings. And I started to grow concerned because December was looming and we had not met. And I didn't want to go into that December meeting unprepared, not being able to give that annual report.
And so when did you, have you ever seen it? Have you personally, I know Mark told us he went and saw the statements. Did you, at what point did you get to start seeing information?
Well, we had received those quarterly reports, like you said, like Mark got into, and I went in and read the 2017 report as well that fall, and still was requesting those meetings with the audit committee and denied. But finally, Mark, through his prodding of Chairman Timken, he got her to agree to go forth with a procedure to seek out and find and eventually hire a proper CPA, an independent CPA firm to do a real audit. And that would have been the first time had we succeeded in that for probably 12 years, because like Mark said, that 2017 report is not an audit of the financial documents. It's more of a political consulting report done telling them about all of their bad practices and that
So
they had better shape up or they're going to get into a lot of trouble.
So when was the auditor hired and who hired the auditor?
So we approved 5 firms in December with Chairman Timken.
Of what year?
That was 2020. Yeah, right. I got elected in, well, we all did. We got elected in April, the end of April. We got installed in June. So by December, because of Mark's prodding of Jane, we finally got the audit committee together and we talked about firms. There were 5 firms that we finally voted on that we sent requests for proposals to.
And what happened?
Mr. Seekauer, he was in charge of sending that out to the 5 firms that we approved, and we only were privy to considering 2 firms by the time we resumed our audit committee meetings in January. And one of those firms was not the firm, one of those firms was not a firm that we had approved, the original 5. And that was the one we ended up with, CLA. Now, it came down to 2 firms, Clark Schaefer Hackett and CLA, that we voted on in January of 2021.
Now, this Mr. Seekauer, what is his role there?
He was the executive director, the same as what Mr. Justin Biss does today.
So did he, who brought this? So let me make sure I understand this right.
Director.
I don't want to.
Pretty much running the office, running the show.
Yeah, I want to make sure I've got this right. So the board, you and Mark and the committee sent proposals to 5 companies to audit, and a new company somehow, only one company was chosen, but somehow a new company got in the mix. Now, isn't it the audit committee's responsibility to choose the auditor?
Yes, and we did take a vote at that meeting and I was outvoted. I wanted to go with Clark Schaefer Hackett because I did not have the time to look at this new firm that they slipped in. And really, we should not even have had considered the new firm because it wasn't one of the original 5. But I was outvoted and everybody from Stark County wanted it. And it didn't, on the surface of it, didn't look too different from Clark Schaefer Hackett. But I was outvoted on that. So we ended up going with the CLA. And the firm actually should have, at that point, not even have accepted the request for proposal because they must have known that they were not independent and had a conflict of interest with Timken Industries. But
Now,
we didn't know that at the time. That was not divulged at the time that there was a conflict of interest with Timken Industries.
Now, what was the conflict of interest with Timken Industries?
Well, we learned in June later on that CLA actually does the taxes for the Timken Industries, Jane's husband's businesses, as well as McKinley Strategies, which is a political consulting lobbying firm that her husband owns and that Mr. Paduchik's brother works for.
So let me make sure I understand this right. An auditing firm that wasn't on your committee's group of 5 found its way into the mix as a 6th company. The 6th company was hired. You voted against it. And then down the road, you found out there was a conflict of interest that you just described. Is that what happened?
Yes. And there was a lot, there was a long waiting period because Jane then got up and resigned and started her Senate run. And we were faced with having to hire a new chairman. So there was a huge transitional period there and nothing happened for a long time. And all of a sudden it was April and we thought the audit was supposed to be finished by June. And so I requested the contract. I said, hey, we're supposed to have this audit going on. What's happening? I know there was a transition of chairmanship, but it's April now, and I'd like to see the contract. Who has signed the contract? Jane never signed the contract. Mr. Paduchik signed the contract. So I asked for the contract, and I was like, well, what do you want the contract for? I'm like, well, I'm on the audit committee. Can I see the contract? I want to see where we're at. Because it was supposed to be done by June, but there was no way. Contract, I think, was signed in mid-April, and there was no way they were going to be finished by June.
And CLA at some point decided that there was a conflict of interest, and they resigned their role as auditor. Is that correct?
Right, and also because I think at that point they realized the significant problems with the accounting, in that they would not be able to audit, just like Right Side Consulting. Well, they wouldn't be able to audit anyway because they're not licensed auditors to begin with. But they did say in the Right Side report that the organization is such a mess that it cannot be audited. And CLA was saying the same thing. It cannot be audited. They needed to clean up their books first.
Okay, Laura,
anything could happen.
Could you give me a kind of a quick snapshot between you of when you found out CLA wasn't going to happen until the lawsuit was filed? Can you tell me what that walk me through what happened between you and Mark and the other 3 people that filed the lawsuit to make you do that? What happened?
Well, the thought of a lawsuit was the farthest thing from my mind. And we just kept trying to get answers and get documents. And then when September, October rolled around, I wasn't even told. I was a member of the audit committee, and I wasn't even told that CLA had terminated its contract. I walked into the September meeting and was like the last to find out. And I was very hurt by that. It was very unprofessional. And then in October, early October, we all got kicked off of our governing committees, our subcommittees, like the Fiscal Review Committee, the Endorsement Policy Review Committee, I was on the Audit Committee, and all of a sudden, Mr. Paduchik puts together this committee on committees, and they decide that we're not good enough, but I really think it was a retaliatory move, and we were just, punished for asking too many questions and bringing up too many issues that they couldn't answer at committee.
Now, how many people were relieved of their committee assignments?
10.
And how many of those were like on the auditing or finance committee?
Mark and Denise were on the fiscal review committee. I was on the audit committee, and then the other committees were, they varied, like from the endorsement policy review committee to the committee on committee, just various other not standing committees. But there were 10 people that were replaced.
What date was the lawsuit filed?
Oh,
approximately.
That's a good question. When was that? It was around, it's been so long. It was around Thanksgiving, wasn't it, Mark?
Yes, it was the end of November when it was filed.
So
right
Mark,
before, probably a week before our December 3rd meeting.
And Mark, I've got to think that was wasn't that a terribly hard decision for you all to make?
Yeah, it was a very hard decision. And, litigation is very, very expensive. And the Ohio Republican Party has a lot of resources, and, we're funding our own litigation here. And as you know, lawyers love to run up bills, and that's what they do. So, we're funding this ourselves, but we really thought we have no other choice because we were kicked off these committees. They wouldn't give us access to records. He's spending money for, given DeWine, over $1 million without being endorsed. All the expenditures, according to the bylaws of the Ohio Republican Party, are supposed to be authorized. And that's the word in the bylaws and permanent rules, that they have to be authorized by the Fiscal Review Committee, but they're not. And so the chairman just spends the money that he wants, and nobody knows. You can't tell from the financial statements where the money's really even going.
That's just hard to. The whole thing is it's really hard for me to understand. I've been a part of a couple boards before in my life, and there was one that kind of brought to my attention when I learned about this, where I went into the meeting for like 4 straight months and there were no financials. And every month I was just told something different. Well, you'll see them next month. Well, next month came and I didn't see anything. And that's, as with a guy with a financial background, isn't that mad? Is it maddening? Is it madness that just drove you to file the lawsuit?
Well, it was just total frustration, and the arrogance of the chairman, and calling us names and accusing us of being anti-Republican and anti-party. His feeling is if you're asking him tough questions, then you're anti-Republican or anti-Ohio Republican Party, because he's the chairman. And actually, the board it owns and operates we're the controlling board for the Ohio Republican Party. He's our employee. We hire him. But yet the whole thing's turned around based on how the bylaws are written. And he just takes control and nobody says anything. They just go along with it. Well, so, very, very frustrating.
So there's just something I just don't understand. So people have alluded to this. So is what you're telling me that our governor has received money from the Ohio Republican Party, but he hasn't been endorsed? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
And it's in total violation of those permanent rules that you're going to put on your website or have on your website.
But do you know how much? Or, I mean,
well, we know from some of the campaign reports, and the DeWine was bragging about how much money he had. So he actually released, these things come out every 6 months. So the Republican Party gave him cash of $500,000, and they did David Yost too in July of 2021. Now they didn't have to report that until February of this year, but they went ahead. The DeWine campaign disclosed it because they were trying to brag about how much money they have, and that's how we found out through their filings with the Secretary of State that the Republican Party had actually given them $500,000 in cash. And then I think there's another 400,000 and maybe a lot more, we don't know, of in-kind contributions. So what they do is they put the governor's campaign staff on the payroll of the Ohio Republican Party and pay him. And there's actually, under state law, no limit on how much money the Republican Party can give the governor, if he had been endorsed, that is, for those kind of in-kind contributions. So there's a total violation of and disrespect of the role of the Republican State Central Committee. And people like Laura and I really believe that the Ohio Republican Party should not enter into endorsing people for the primaries. We believe that the voters in the Ohio Republican Party should choose our nominees. And once those nominees are selected, then the Republican Party should use its resources to help them in the general election win against the Democrats. But we shouldn't be taking sides in the primary and giving money and authorized money and stuff to the governor, or even endorsing any candidate for any statewide office, and let the voters do that.
Well, I just need to understand a couple things. Now, is it true that of the 66 members, that a certain percentage of those members have been appointed by the governor to positions? And how many people is that?
We have approximately,
I think that, go ahead.
well, we have approximately 16 people who are directly appointed by the governor and serve on these boards. Some of them public university boards, and others like the Ohio Lottery Commission, the Racing Commission, I'm just giving some examples, the Bureau of Workmen's Compensation, like Mr. Bainbridge said. You have the treasurer, Dave Johnson, making $2,500 an hour at the Bureau of Workers' Comp. Just all of those state agencies. I mean, gosh, how many of them are there? So these people are very obligated to vote for Governor DeWine for an endorsement. And that's why they're placed on the committee, to make sure that they have the vote so that he gets endorsed, because whoever wins that endorsement really has almost 100% chance of winning the primary. It just wipes out all competition. There's no competition on that primary. It's a very, very unfair playing field. And it's unfair to the Ohio Republican voter, because we don't have a primary vote and we don't have a primary voice.
Well, that's my question. That's my question, and we're about ready to go to questions from the audience. But there's just something I just don't get. So my perception is I'm voting for these 66 people, and these 66 people, if there's going to be a huge check written to a candidate, they're going to vote to have that done. Are you telling me that the 66 people didn't decide to send the money with like a vote, or just did the chairman decide to do that?
Oh, are you talking about the money that was given to the unendorsed candidates?
Yes, I am talking about that.
Yes, that was done without the approval of the Fiscal Review Committee that is supposed to authorize all major expenditures like that. And it was also done without the authorization of the committee and the Endorsement Policy Review Committee. We did not pass policy for this endorsement policy. Endorsement is a two-step process, okay? You have to have endorsement policy passed first, okay? And then after that, you vote to either endorse or not endorse. And if you vote to not endorse, then it's over. But that never happens. Because they have the vote, they'll vote to endorse, and then they will endorse the individual candidates as they go along. But you're supposed to, according to the bylaws, pass that policy, that written policy first. The last time written primary policy was passed was in December of 2019. We have no policy for 2022, and we have no endorsed candidates for 2022. In fact, I'll give you an example. Actually, when we endorsed the Ohio Supreme Court justices in September, we did it wrong because we didn't pass that policy first, which we should have.
So what happens if the governor, if he's been given this money and he goes to the primary and he loses in the, I don't know what's going to, I don't have any idea what's going to happen in the primary, but let's say he would lose. Does that mean all that money that has just kind of been gone down the drain?
It's
That's
been
really a
wasted.
great point. It will have been wasted. That is a great point. And the way the finances are, who knows where that money's going or where it'll end up. I mean, at this rate, you know,
It's-
could end
it's-
up in the back pocket of somebody
it's
like
hard-
Larry Householder.
It's hard to imagine. So I've got some questions, and the first one comes from Bill from the Cheviot Gazette. Two-part question for you. According to Local 12's investigative report, party leaders said the 654 was attributed to data point errors. Does this explanation seem accurate? Second part, is it possible this missing money is currently in Vegas riding on the Bengals? Well, who day to win the Super Bowl? Just kidding. Thanks for the discussion tonight. Who wants to handle that, Mark or Laura?
Well, I'll just say
I can
something
handle that.
funny. We're lucky. You know, if we still had Mickey Monis in Ohio, it'd probably be in Las Vegas. But go ahead, Mark.
That is a bogus explanation about this coding error. I mean, it's ridiculous. Basically every transaction that and they've got some kind of a report on this that's really bogus. And you know, it's a systematic error because they have no internal controls. And what happened is, and what happened because of the $640,000 and how it was erroneously recorded, is that the financial statements, in an accounting language, you would call it the financials for 2017 and 2018 were materially misstated or significantly misstated. We know that because of how this was recorded. And somebody needs to go back and audit the entire year 17, 18, 19, 20, and now 21, and put all the numbers back together and figure out what the right answer is and what the numbers mean. So, I mean, that's kind of the answer. They come up with bogus answers to try to blow off us because they don't want to do a full audit. You know, one other observation I'll make along this lines is that, you know, the former person was the quote unquote accounting director who had a degree in political sciences and didn't know what he was doing. I asked him how much they paid for the right side compliance report in 2017. And he told me they paid $50,000 for it. Now, any consulting firm could have spent $5,000 and determined the records were unauditable and just ridiculous, okay? And spent that money. What they should have done is use that money. If they would have spent, if Jane Timken would have been smart enough to say, let's hire some CPAs and let's do what the right side compliance report said they should do. Implement generally accepted accounting principles, implement internal controls, hire a competent bookkeeper for the Ohio Republican Party, do policies and procedures that protect the organization so it's recording things to the Federal Election Commission and the Ohio Secretary of State correctly. If they would have spent that money to do that, we wouldn't be having this discussion tonight. And now what is happening is the Ohio Republican Party is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on two law firms that are fighting our lawsuit to prevent us from having an audit and seeing the financial statements. That's where the money's going. Instead of spending the money to hire CPA firms to come in and do the work and straighten out the books, they're wasting money in hiring lawyers. I mean, it's crazy.
Let's take another question. This one is an anonymous question, and it says the threatening letter that Mr. Paduchik's attorney sent to Empower You and had a link to a report that he claimed answered all the questions that have been raised. This person says, I read the report and it seems very narrow and not especially responsive to any of tonight's comments guests are making. I noticed that they state that they did not have access to images of checks. That seems pretty unbelievable to me. Everyone can make available copies of checks. Any comments you'd like to make about that?
Yeah, that was actually something that I really picked up on immediately, was that they said, well, we have the numbers for the checks, but we don't know whose checks those were. And so I immediately was like, they're not scanning the checks. Every check that comes through my household gets scanned. Okay, so they're not scanning the checks, and that's something that was evidently not happening after that right side compliance report came out. They should have immediately started scanning the checks, and they didn't. So all that, the money that came in through the accounts receivables, we don't know who that money came. We truly do not know where that money came from. They say it came from Stivers, but we don't know because they don't scan the checks.
Here's another.
So that's a big problem.
Here's another question.
They may not still be scanning the checks.
Is the chairman of the state GOP hired by the Central Committee?
Yes.
Now, what's that? Was there actually a vote, or how did that all work out?
Well, we have to elect the chairman and it was actually Mr. Paduchik against a competitor, John Berger, who's a former state representative. And Mr. Berger came to us on his own, of his own free will, but I believe that it was probably Mr. JoAnn who wanted Mr. Paduchik in there as chairman so that he could get him the endorsement, and probably hoping that they would get Jane Timken the endorsement for Senate. So he came in and was pretty much, you know, we didn't really have much of a choice. Although
here's a fair question.
And we had a Zoom call that Jane Timken announced to us she was resigning. Within 2 hours, I got a call from Bob Paduchik telling me, she didn't say this, but we all knew she was running for the Senate. And I got a call within 2 hours from Bob Paduchik that said, my name is Bob Paduchik, and I'm going to be the next chairman of the Ohio Republican Party. He, at the time, was working as a lobbyist for DeWine. DeWine absolutely picked him. He is a puppet of Mike DeWine.
Thank you. Question from another listener: could it be that they're just incompetent as accountants, and the money is still there?
Yeah, could be. We don't know what happened to the money.
And that's your contention. You just don't know. We
just don't know.
Well, another question: were all of those, and this is from John, were all those committee members who were removed from their positions a part of this movement for information? Were they partners in your efforts?
Yes.
No.
They were.
No, they weren't. There were a couple who were removed from the committees who are not plaintiffs on the lawsuit.
No, they're not plaintiffs, but they are all supporting our position. I mean, almost all of them anyway.
Almost all. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say all of them. There were some committee members who stood up at the last meeting when I made that resolution and said, you know what, I've been kicked off of this committee and I don't know why. And I think it's just because I'm a Renee supporter. And, you know, they're friends and acquaintances of ours, but not necessarily, they're not plaintiffs and they're not, you know, in support of the lawsuit.
I think this is a great question to both of you from Jill. Thank you for sharing your insights. What are the action steps we can take as citizens of Ohio?
The most important thing that everybody can do is understand what the state central committee is. We are the governing body. And when you go to when the Republicans go to the ballot in May for the primary, instead of just looking at the top of the ballot and who's running for the Republican nomination for governor and attorney general and the secretary of state and the U.S. Senate, go all the way down the ballot and do your research ahead of time and vote for one of the reformers that are running to take back the Republican Party from this incestuous group that, you know, has run it for years.
So I had when I put this class up, Mark and Laura, I mean, it wasn't more than 5 minutes later, an email popped into my my Outlook from an attorney in Southwest Ohio, and this was the question. from an attorney, how does undermining the Republican Party publicly help in beating the Democrats in the fall?
You know, that is a fabulous question. And the only reason we went public on this is because they would not let us solve these problems internally on the board and on our committees of the Republican Party. We were kicked off our committees. We were, they did not, after I asked that question in May of 2021 about what happened to the $640,000, they did not have a meeting of the Fiscal Review Committee to go over the quarterly financial statements for the rest of the year. They did not want to answer our questions. We tried to meet with Paduchik numerous times. We tried to get a joint meeting of the Audit and Fiscal Review Committee. They rebuked us the whole way. So the fact that this is being laid out in the public in this lawsuit is not because of us. It's because of Bob Paduchik would not work with us, would not work within the committee structure. And he is such an arrogant person that he believes he's in charge of the Ohio Republican Party.
Well, it's what the picture you paint. I'm not there. It's just I'm reacting to your picture. Is that this is what happens when you've got a board that's not strong and doesn't understand that it's their job to manage the entity. And what happens is you get a weak board, and a strong leader can just take off and run. And I don't know. Am I hearing you correctly? Is that what's happening?
That's exactly right, Dan. And that's why people need to go to the ballot this May and vote for strong people, not a bunch of sheep. I mean, so many of these people, while very well-meaning, are either they're lobbyists, they work for the state, and if they vote against the chairman and against DeWine, they're going to lose their job. So they have a real built-in conflict of interest. And we've got to take back the Republican Party this May by getting reformers in there who can do that.
So if you've got somebody listening tonight, we've got a great crowd. It's so good to have you all back. And they're thinking to themselves, well, okay, I've got to find out who's on my state central committee. I don't really know. And they find out, and they know that person, and then they find out how they voted, and they didn't vote for the audit. They didn't vote to back up what you guys are doing. What should this person say? Get on the phone or jot them? What should they say to them?
I think they should
call them,
to
or they should email them, and they should be very respectful and ask them questions of why they vote certain ways. And they should absolutely look at that person very closely and consider, like Mark was saying, voting and supporting the challenger candidate. I think there are going to be a lot of challenger candidates this year. I actually think this year is going to be a very bad year for incumbents, Republican, and if there are any Democrats in Ohio, there don't seem to be. But I think it's going to be a very challenging year for incumbents. And Mark and I are incumbents, but we're incumbents we should keep.
Okay, I've got three quick questions and we're gonna close up. I've got a couple other things I really need to do. So we'll try to move through these fast. I understand the Central Committee is having a closed door meeting next Friday with the intent to endorse Governor DeWine. Is there anyone we should contact to try to persuade them otherwise?
But what you should do is contact your state Central Committee member for your area and call that person and talk to them and say you don't think that they should endorse anybody or that they shouldn't endorse DeWine. Whatever your position is, you should tell them what your position is. And their names and information's available.
Closing the meeting 1 year ago in February, we sat through 45 minutes of the parliamentarian/lawyer telling us that our meetings had to be open to the public and that we were, subject to the sunshine laws, and everything had to be transparent. And here we are a year later, closing the meeting to the public just because they want to endorse DeWine behind closed doors, and they're probably afraid that DeWine's going to get booed if they had the public in there, like he got booed in Dayton a couple of years ago when Trump came to town. I think they're really afraid of that.
Somebody asked the question, what are the Ohio Republican Party's main sources of income? Are they just, what are they?
Donations.
And I want to make sure I've got this right. So I think everybody, I had a couple people jot me notes about the interview, Mark, you did on Brian Thomas's show this morning, and people just don't seem to understand why wouldn't everybody want to have the ORP audited? Why wouldn't everybody want that to happen? And on your resolutions at this December 3rd meeting, if I got the gist, it seemed to me you were getting beat about maybe 35 to 27 or 26 or something like that. Is that about is that about how far you off are from getting this done? Or is it more than that?
It's probably more than that. I mean, they've got so many of their people on there that, have conflict of interest. And, these people, if they vote to endorse a candidate on the 18th of February, when the next meeting is, those people should recuse themselves, and they have a clear conflict of interest. But I can guarantee you they won't do that, because they need those votes. They need every one of those votes to get DeWine endorsed, and they will go to any extreme to do that, whether they follow the bylaws or not.
Another topic comes up that I just have to ask you, because many people commented to me personally on this. How does the first energy scandal factor into the Ohio Public Republican Party?
I think it's a huge thing, and it's right there with Mike DeWine. And, he clearly appointed the first energy lobbyist, chief lobbyist, to be chairman of the Public Utilities Commission. And, I really believe, to be honest with you, that the Democrats and the mainstream media are just waiting for Mike DeWine to get nominated. And, the householder and Matt Borges, who Matt Borges, the former chairman of the Republican Party before Jane Timken. And this spring and summer is going to be huge news across Ohio. And it's going to be used against Mike DeWine, and it's going to be used against Mike DeWine's son, who's running for the Supreme Court.
Well, all Governor DeWine will have to do is change to the Democrat Party in like October or so, and then they'll love him and they will not attack him.
Any final comments you'd like to make, Mark?
Well, I just hope people pay attention. I mean, I would encourage people to go to that video that you're going to put on your website that Dwayne Pullman did, and watch it. It's about a 5-minute video, and Dwayne really brings everything out on what's happening in a very, very concise way in 5 minutes. And I would encourage you to do that. I always encourage you to pass that on to others. And I would encourage you to really do some due diligence for the May primary and vote for the reformers in the May primary.
Laura, any final words from you?
That's not fake news.
Thank you very much. And that video from Dwayne Pullman is already up on the website. If you haven't seen it yet, 6 minutes, it'll help you communicate with everyone what's going on. Mark Bainbridge, Laura Rosenberger, appreciate you joining us tonight, and appreciate all your energy that you have in trying to reform the Ohio Republican Party and get it to where everybody wants it to be. So thank you so much for joining EmpowerU. Good night to